Hi, everybody. I have an amazing panel here to discuss some of the hottest topics of recent years. No, it's like Ethereum has been all about DeFi for the last year. Everything was about DeFi. But some argue that the first DeFi was Bitcoin. And if you think about it, there was this questioning from the Ethereum community, or this tension between the Ethereum and Bitcoin community that has been going for years, about the ability of Bitcoin to evolve, to extend its capabilities to become a full decentralized financial system. So we all agree, or I think most people agree in the crypto space, that Bitcoin is king in terms of liquidity. Bitcoin is king in terms of being the sovereign store of value, but the question is about the other functionalities that a decentralized financial system needs. And so I hope with this amazing panel of people, we will be able to answer that question. Is Bitcoin capable of supporting and being an integral part of the DeFi movement, of the full decentralized financial system that is being built? So thank you all for being here. I will ask from you like a brief introduction and what are you doing today in the space? And then we move on the first question. So please, let's start with you, Max, and I will try to shuffle you around in the different questions.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Diego. So Matt Luongo, I originally got in the space back in, late 2013, early 2014.
Guys, I need volume.
Founded a company called Fold. And since then, I've been doing all sorts of Bitcoin stuff. The most recent is a project called TBTC, which is an effort to bring a trustless bridge from Bitcoin to Ethereum. And really what we're trying to do is have a permissionless sidechain that uses Ethereum.
So Matt,
who's up?
What about you, Max? What have you been doing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I am Max Carjuzaa. I am one of the co-founders of Money on Chain. Money on Chain has built the first Bitcoin collateralized stablecoin. We have a very interesting token for Bitcoin holders that it's called BitPro. The BitPro is a liquidity token that allows you to earn some profit on Bitcoins supporting the protocol. I've been in the space since 2011, and I've been working for Money on Chain for the last 2 years.
Excellent. What about you, Kira?
Yes, my name is Mosayeri. I'm a product manager at BitGO. BitGO has been around since 2013. We are a infrastructure technology provider as well as a prime brokerage, but I'm mainly here to talk about WBTC today, which is our wrapped Bitcoin product on the Ethereum ecosystem, which is the 16th largest cryptocurrency on itself today, north of $2 billion.
Amazing.
Very excited.
So, and what about you, Edan? What have you been doing lately?
Well, for the last 10 years, I've been engaged in trying to help more people get access to Bitcoin and use their Bitcoin in their everyday lives more effectively. And I think 10 years ago, I came across Bitcoin, and I strongly believe that if you can get through life just doing one or two things right, but really right, then everything else becomes easier. And the amazing thing about Bitcoin is it gives you that opportunity to do one thing right. You can do one thing which is right for, ideologically, morally, creating sovereign money. And the other thing is you can get wealthy while doing it. So it was the perfect combination. And so right now, I'm working on Sovryn. Sovryn is a project looking to bring DeFi to Bitcoin layer 2. So the ability to do all of the things that people would like to be doing with their Bitcoin currently through centralized services like borrowing, lending, trading, leverage, you can now do with a decentralized alternative, which is Bitcoin native.
Amazing. You know, I'm now looking at all of us, we have almost 50 years of Bitcoin experience in this panel, which is very uncommon, no? Because we have a lot of old-timers in this panel. And so, you know, one interesting thing is like, you know, we have all in common that you all have in common that you are working with Bitcoin in decentralized finance protocols, but you are doing it in different ways. No, it's like, Matt, you are finding ways to bring Bitcoin to other blockchains in a safe way, in a sovereign way through TBTC. BitGO is doing the same with a different model, more of a custodial model, but the same, like providing tools for Bitcoin to interact with decentralized financial protocols. And, you know, Max and Edan, they are directly building these financial protocols. No, one is creating kind of a P2P monetary system. Max is building a P2P monetary system where Bitcoin is the gold, the reserve currency to issue stable assets. And in the case of Edan, he's building on top of that and other stable assets to actually provide, you know, lending, margin trading, all the things that are like the basics of a financial system. So Bitcoin is at the core, but you're using Bitcoin in a much different way or in different environments to achieve this goal of extending the Bitcoin capabilities to be integrated into a full financial system. Before I get, you know, deeper into this, my first question is like, when we talk about DeFi, is really, because if you think about decentralized finance, I would say that the only protocol or one of the very few protocols that you can say are really decentralized is Bitcoin. So is really, when we talk about DeFi, is really DeFi what we have today, or that's more of an aspirational goal of the industry? I'm saying in Ethereum and otherwise, no, in general. Are we really doing DeFi, or, you know, it's, well, I want your opinion on that. So I told everybody I was going to shuffle you, so Edan, please take the lead on this one.
Well, I think that most of the projects that fall into the DeFi category, right, are called DeFi projects, are not really decentralized at all. However, I think at the same time, most Bitcoiners are dismissive or maybe even ignorant of the degree to which projects that have been built outside of Bitcoin, and in particular on Ethereum, have really managed to push the envelope in terms of the kind of things that truly decentralized projects can do. So a few cool examples, I think, is Uniswap 1, which was truly a permissionless censorship resistant system. There was no owner to that system. A little bit less than that, you have systems like MakerDAO, which are creating, which creates a stablecoin, which doesn't have a clear administrator or custodial system, is pretty permissionless. And on the panel today, we have Matt and Max, who both have built systems. I think Matt, he can't upgrade the system or change the system once it's launched. He's kind of screwed. Like, he has to be very, very careful about what he launches, because there's nothing he can do or any other dev can do to change the system. And I've been, you know, following what Max is doing, and he's got a very, very strong emphasis on building a truly decentralized system as well as a Bitcoiner. So DeFi is real. It exists today. You have to look for it. You have to be able to differentiate, but I think it's definitely more than an aspiration.
Kira, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think decentralization or DeFi isn't really a on and off switch. It's not a Boolean. It's not a true or false. It's rather in the spectrum. And even decentralization itself, there are many different criteria within it that you can break it into. For example, permissionlessness, the distribution of the network, the governance of it, and whatnot. So I think we really have to break down into which one of these are the users valuing more, in which part of the world, in which ecosystem, and we'll see different flavors of these protocols. Bitcoin being bridged or the decentralized applications on different blockchains, they will all kind of develop in a way to address different needs that people have in mind when they think about decentralization. So one thing I think that is very relevant for this panel is the concept of permissionlessness, which is a massive phenomenon, very important in South America because people have experiences with such. In other parts of the world, you know, permissionlessness might not be as big of a factor. Another pillar of decentralization might be. And even with permissionlessness, you know, we can break it down into the asset itself being permissionless, the application being permissionless, and they all hope to make it efficient for one of the use cases. And I think we'll see exciting products coming out of all these attempts and protocols, and we already have them.
Amazing. So yeah, I think so. We see some things emerging. So I mean, decentralization. There's different degrees, and as Kira was mentioning, you have decentralization in different points of a platform. No, so you might have a highly centralized initial setup. Then you might have a highly centralized operations, but then the governance might be centralized. So you can have different degrees of decentralization in different components of an open network, of an open protocol. And I think, you know, at the end, it's more about permissionless access to services or openness. And I agree on that. So Max, what's your take? And then Matt, you can follow on suite.
Well, I think that decentralization is a goal and is a path, and every project starts centralized. Even Bitcoin, when Bitcoin launched in 2009, all the Bitcoins were in the hands of Satoshi, all the code was written by Satoshi, and all the hashing power were in the hands of Satoshi. So every project starts centralized. I think that the important thing here is that every project should have a path of decentralization and a goal of decentralization. And we need to understand why we want that decentralization. And I think that the biggest advantage that we take from decentralization, besides permissionless, is that no one has control over the protocol. No one can change the rules, and the rules are clear and are transparent. That is the main goal of decentralization.
Thank you. Matt, your take on this?
Yeah, well, Edan already took a pretty positive approach to Ethereum, so maybe I'll take like a little bit more negative. I'm not used to it. So, you know, one of the things that I think is interesting here is I agree that we're seeing a lot of things that actually have a claim to censorship resistance and immutability and permissionlessness outside of Bitcoin. And that's really cool. Like, as a technologist, the reason that I got into this space was because I was trying to use PayPal for something, and they didn't like the business I was doing. And so I had to use Bitcoin, and this was in 2014, and it was just a pure payments play. All the rest for me, hard money, realizing kind of like the locus of control and what central banks, what role they played in my life, that for me came after. Equally important, but it came second. So I think on the one hand, I'm really excited to see this tech cropping up anywhere. But on the other, because we're building this Bitcoin and Ethereum bridge, I have to deal with people on both sides. And the culture differences are pretty incredible. So the reason so much of DeFi isn't is because a lot of Ethereum, and really just a lot of tech in general, has this culture of talking. They like to talk about how something, it sounds like they're talking about today, but they mean 1 to 5 years from now. So when you hear people talk about Ethereum, like ETH2, for example, they say, look, we solved it. We've launched ETH2. Well, you've solved a thing, right? And you know, but your roadmap has probably another 4 years of work before it's really going to be the thing that most people mean when they talk about these scalability wins. In the same way with DeFi, most of the big projects that I think come to people's mind have admin keys, have ways to shut them down. And at the end of the day, for me, why am I working on this tech? I don't want to be told no. And so if there's a team whose door can be knocked down, or who maybe I became politically unpopular and they can cut off my access, that's just not interesting to me anymore. So I guess I'm sort of agreeing with everyone here. It is a spectrum. Decentralization is a spectrum, but a lot of these teams on Ethereum could try a lot harder. And I hope they're listening to this and maybe try to learn a little bit more from the Bitcoin culture side.
Could I disagree with some of the people on the panel?
I think, of course, you know, that we want to make the panel spicy, so go ahead. In an orderly fashion, you can disagree. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I don't think it's that much of a spectrum, right? I mean, sure, there's a spectrum, like, you know, human beings are on a spectrum of how tall they are, but none of them are skyscrapers, right? So it's true that this thing that we talk about, and I really don't like the word decentralization because it seems to imply that there is a spectrum, like, oh, you go from 1 to 2, you're now double as decentralized. That's not how it works, right? Decentralization is just a tool. It's not actually a goal or an aspiration or something we should be trying to do. Satoshi wasn't interested in decentralization. He was interested in censorship resistance, in permissionlessness, in creating a vetocracy. In other words, a system where anyone could veto any change that was going to be imposed upon them. Those are the things that we're trying to create. And those things aren't really a spectrum. They can be a little bit more or less, but the difference between having them at all and having basically none of them is a huge gulf. And unless a system is designed from the ground up to provide for permissionless, censorship resistance, vetocracy, right? To have a situation where no one can ever be in control or shut down the system or arbitrarily censor a transaction, then there is no spectrum.
Yeah, so that takes me to a reflection. We started the LaBitConf talking about opting out, no? And I think, you know, these protocols, all these protocols, whether they are censorship resistant or not, they have that capability of allowing you to opt out. So at least for sure, and they are more transparent than the traditional financial system. So at least they are an improvement. But your point, Edan, and I think that's the Bitcoiner point, no, or the Bitcoiner take is like, you know, if you have this opt-out and you have more transparency, that from a Bitcoiner perspective is not enough. It's like, you need to be censorship resistant, and that's a little bit of what Matt was also saying. Like, if somebody can take a door down and capture the keys of a few developers, then that's it. It's like, I cannot, like, you know, remove trust or at least not, you know, be sure that we are not going to be coerced into failing our contracts, our social and smart contracts, no? So in a way, that's a very interesting point. I don't know if some of you want to add on this topic. I think we are, in a way, getting into my following question, that is, why DeFi for Bitcoin? No, it's like, why, you know, some people say, well, if I have Ethereum, why I need DeFi for Bitcoin? No, but I think we are kind of answering this as we go. So I don't know if you want to add something on this topic of, you know, opting in, opting out, censorship resistance, transparency. Please do. Maybe Max, Kira, you want to extend on this?
Yes, you were saying why DeFi on Bitcoin or why DeFi on Ethereum. I guess that is not the question. It is the same. What is the blockchain running? Or not exactly the same, because there is not the same level of trust that you can have in the RSK network or Ethereum network or Ethereum Classic network. It's not the same. RSK and Ethereum are much more stronger network, and that characteristics are probably unique. But when we talk about DeFi, what I care about is the characteristics of the protocol, the DeFi protocol. What I am using of collateral, if the protocol is trustless, if someone is holding the keys, if there is a governance protocol. But I don't think that the question is Ethereum or Bitcoin, because Ethereum is a blockchain. It is the same. I think that 10 years from now, people will be using mobile applications in their phones, using DeFi, using Bitcoin. I think they won't care what blockchain runs behind that application.
I have to agree.
It's the same with internet today. You don't care what protocol are you using. Everything you care is that you put something on Facebook and your friends can see it. That is all people care about.
I hope we can do better than that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a reinforcement of my question. Why DeFi for Bitcoin? If it's all the same, if it runs on Ethereum or any blockchain with sufficient security, RSK, Ethereum, Bitcoin. But if it's about that, I mean, there is an edge for DeFi for Bitcoin that now nobody else can tackle.
Yes, but it's not the same. The currency that you are going to use in the blockchain, that is not the same. It's not the same to use Bitcoin that to use Aurora Coin, of course.
The underlying asset, that's what you're saying, not necessarily about the network that operates that asset.
Exactly. In the future, I think that every blockchain will be interconnected with every other one.
Kira, what's your take on this? And Matt, I know you want to add something, so you go next.
Yeah, I think an important point to add for us, and I agree with Max, like in a few years, we will not have this issue. People will not realize what application they're using, what blockchain they're using, what form of the asset they're using. But as builders, we cannot ignore these questions. We want to answer these questions. As much as people like to boast about Bitcoin being censorship resistant, the rules cannot be changed. It could be changed. The miners can change the rules. And the miners are concentrated in a country that doesn't have a problem knocking down on people's doors. So when I think about it in the future, there's a lot of fat tail risks that I see. These are events that are very unlikely to happen, but if they do, they have very significant effects. So when I look at that horizon, I do want optionality with my protocols. I do want optionality with the types of tokenized Bitcoins that I have, which blockchains they're on. I want different options there because, we just don't know how things will pan out. We want optionality is, I think, to me, is one of the core concepts of crypto. It's not to force everyone to be decentralized. It's not to force everyone to use hard money. But hey, if you want hard money, here it is. You have the option of it. You have a lot of different options to use it in different ways. But I don't know if we want to touch on this, but I think this is actually an advantage to see different platforms building towards the same goal. And they attract different cultures. And because of these cultures of people who are building these and the users, I think the trajectory of the products down the road will also be different. And that just makes the space more interesting to me. I think we have more optionality. We're going to have diverse and better products because we have different projects that are building towards the same goal in a different way.
I think, Matt, you want to, but you're raising another topic that I think is interesting. It's like, we want a monoculture, we want diversity. I think Bitcoin by design was designing a Darwinian, very savage Darwinian model, but still the option to fork it and try to compete on the markets with a slightly different protocol is there in Bitcoin from the beginning. It's part of the protocol. So we can leave that up to after you, Matt, add your comments. But I think that's a very interesting topic. Is diversity of protocols and these wildlife evolutionary model providing a better outcome at the end, or we need to go to a monoculture and say, okay, it's only Bitcoin, let's build a stack on top of this and that's it.
Well, you introduced a really Strong idea there, Diego, which is like, and I'm going to try to not trigger you too much, Edan, by the way, because I know you're like ready to get in this too. We're poking it. So like, I'm hearing a few things, right? So we're talking about the asset versus the technology. And I think clearly these two things are different. And, you know, we've also talked about, just to be clear, if the miners try to unilaterally change Bitcoin, we've shown that a user-activated soft fork can work. So what's important to me about Bitcoin the asset, but also about Bitcoin the tech versus Ethereum the tech, is that the Ethereum community doesn't have the muscle that the Bitcoin community does to pull off a user-activated soft fork. I personally was involved with the most recent ProgPow push on Ethereum, and I had to get up in the dev channels and was a huge pain in the butt. And when I said, "Hey guys, our team will maintain a non-ProgPow geth if there's a strong enough community, like we'll do it. We have the engineering talent to do it." And a bunch of the devs didn't realize what they were walking into, and they didn't realize that what I was saying was, the community can choose. You don't choose as the developer. You don't choose as the miner. Ultimately, the people who run the software choose. So what I think is really important about Bitcoin versus Ethereum in this case is, you know, Ethereum is complicated. And as a user, it's hard to have opinions on the technology. When you have Vitalik 2 years out talking about some fancy like data availability proof, it's hard to know when should you say no and when should you not allow a hard fork to happen. It's difficult. And with Bitcoin already, it's a lot to ask a new person to understand the game theory of Bitcoin. But users were passionate enough to say, like, no, we will have a user-activated soft fork. Now, obviously, it requires like a Luke Dash Jr. figure. It requires someone who will be their voice and give them that outlet. But anyway, I guess what I'm getting at and what I love about what Diego just said is there are extinction level events where Darwinism matters. And right now, there's this Cambrian explosion where there's not a lot of selective pressure, right? And so Bitcoin, the asset, can win despite Bitcoin, the technology. And that we're seeing all these other chains do really well because of technology improvements. If tomorrow there is a ban on all crypto use, you have to ask yourself which of these chains would keep running. I'm confident Bitcoin will. I'm less sure about Ethereum. I see it as on the cusp, but then most other stuff, it just won't. It'll just be abandoned because you will not care enough to run this thing in your basement over Tor. You won't care. And so for me, like, I'll do that with my Bitcoin node. I don't know. Geth's already kind of a pain. You know, as fun as I think it is, maybe I won't. I don't know if I would risk my freedom to keep it running. And so the question is just how many people are in that camp? Because at the end of the day, maybe decentralization is not a spectrum, but the difference might ultimately be the people at the end and whether or not they'll stand up for it. So anyway, just taking this in a bit of a different direction, because I agree that all these chains are going to be connected. I agree that the tech is moving forward. We're all technologists on this call. But if things get hard, not everything's going to survive.
That takes me, and I'm sorry to cut, because this topic we are getting into, I love it. It's something like when with the scaling debates, you know, I was deep into that process, and it was, for me, it was like the internal trigger of this questioning about like, what is the governance of Bitcoin? How is its evolutionary model and all those things that I think are, you know, it takes years until you get to that point, because it's like an onion, no, of discovery, the famous rabbit hole. You go deeper and deeper. But, you know, at the end, and you were mentioning this point that I want to surface on my next question, that is like, at the end, it's about adoption, because where the money flows, you know, and this is also, you know, true with living things. It's like if nutrients flow into one plant or one tree, then the tree will thrive. If not, it will wither and die. No, so in a way, there is a fight between, although we understand like the deep consequences, you know, of choosing one path or the other to protect sovereignty and certain values. At the end, I think this fight is about adoption and where the money flows. No? And we are also in early days for that, because we are talking about an industry of 300 billion. It's not like if you compare that to the 70, 80 trillion dollars of GDP of the world, that's a drop in the ocean still, a more relevant drop, I would say, maybe a bucket in the ocean, not the drop anymore, but still, like, we are in that process of, and as I see it, is like you have on one side the traditional infrastructure, financial infrastructure, where all the money sits, and then you have this emerging financial infrastructure that is fighting its way in or out, you know, into a new world, in a new way of doing finance. So in that fight, how do you see the Bitcoin DeFi movement versus the Ethereum DeFi movement? And because we are actually fighting for the resources, regardless of the technical, you know, and ideological elements of it. So
I'm gonna be rude. I gotta say, the dinosaurs grew big and now they're dead. Yeah. And so, you know, something can get all the nutrients, but if there's a big enough event, it pays to be small. So anyway, I'll step off my soapbox.
So we are going back to the Cambrian. That was an extinction event, like 700 million years ago. So what's your take, Edan, on that?
Well, the reason I'm interested in Bitcoin, and I think of myself as a Bitcoiner rather than someone who's interested in cryptocurrencies. There are lots of reasons for that, but the big reason is because the thing which is interesting to me in this space is that we have the opportunity to create a new financial system, and on top of that, a new, on the basis of a new monetary system, and on top of that, a new economic system that everyone globally can participate in. I think that's the really exciting thing, to have a transparent, uncorruptible economy that anyone can participate in. And I think the only asset with a real shot, and certainly the asset with the best shot of accomplishing that, is not XRP or Tron or ETH, it's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the center of gravity of the cryptocurrency world. It is the most censorship resistant, most fairly launched, most clearly branded, inspirational, shared truth, which is what money is, right? A shared truth that the entire world can galvanize around. And the reason I dislike many of the other tokens, and there are lots of reasons, but the main reason is because I think if we're behind this mission, if we agree on this mission of changing the financial and economic order of the world for the better, we all need to come together and work towards that goal. And we dissipate, we reduce the concentration of our effort when we're all going in different directions and, you know, trying to figure out like what other new token we can introduce. A token, a currency, is a standard, and that's why Bitcoin is so important. And I want to bring this back to the question that you asked a moment ago. Why DeFi for Bitcoin? Well, I mean, how could you have Bitcoin without DeFi? Having Bitcoin without DeFi is kind of like getting a gym membership and then paying someone else to go work out for you. It's completely missing the point. Why would you have a permissionless, decentralized asset and then hand it over to someone else who is regulated by the exact people you're trying to get away from to manage for you? It makes no sense.
Okay, good. Kira, do you want to add something? Max, do you want to add something? Or?
Oh, yes, I fully agree with what Yago has said. The only thing I want to add is that when we think about Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the idea of free money for humanity, free from freedom, not free from I don't have to pay. And one very important thing about Bitcoin are the monetary properties. And one of the biggest monetary properties that Bitcoin has is it has almost no inflation. There will be only 21 million Bitcoins. If we love this idea of free money for the humanity, we have to choose only one, because if we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, and another coins, then we have inflation, and we are losing that interesting monetary policy that Bitcoin has. And if you analyze every coin in the spectrum, Bitcoin has the best monetary policy or the best monetary characteristics in the crypto world.
Excellent. Kira, what's your take on this, how this will play out, in the coming years for DeFi for Bitcoin versus DeFi in other platforms or with other assets mostly, because that's what we are agreeing, that it's mostly about the asset and the values that that asset carries, or intrinsic values of that asset, no?
Right. Yeah. I think most people here agree about the value of Bitcoin, what's great about it, and why it's leading the charge. So I don't think there's much of a discussion about that. What I do want to mention is that I think ideas are inherently subjective. So what Bitcoin means to me is very different than what Bitcoin means to my mother, means to my friend, means to a institutional investor, what it means to a South American user who is facing persecution politically and economically. And all of these people, all of these users look at this differently. So sure, maybe, maybe we don't care about a regulated space, but if you're a fund manager and you have more than $150 million of other people's money, you're required by law. You cannot do business unless you have a regulated custodian. So that's just an example that we cannot rule out everyone else who doesn't fit into kind of our view of the user base. We have to acknowledge that. And I think that's why it's great that we have diversity. And that's what I was kind of hinting on earlier, that these different protocols, because they kind of embrace some features of this umbrella of decentralization better, they attract particular types of users. And because those users cluster around certain projects, they kind of shape the way the project's trajectory goes. And an example of this would be Uniswap versus SushiSwap. So SushiSwap, a total fork of Uniswap. They want exactly the same thing. But because they attract the different communities, the trajectory of the two projects 2 months now, that just only 2 or 3 months later, is totally different in terms of the products they're coming up with. Another example I heard recently is Twitter versus Facebook. Twitter first came about, and people were familiar with Facebook, like, oh, this is just a status update. But because some of the fundamentals of Twitter, once you establish the account, it's public by default, and you can have this follower system. It attracted different types of users and have led to different types of products. So I don't think we should rule out types of users just because, we haven't dealt with that aspect of the financial world ourselves. So this is a diverse world, and people will find their niches.
Yes.
I'd argue, though, that even those users, you can build on a weaker, strong foundation, right? So in the case of needing a regulated custodian, the question is, does your regulated custodian do the entire bridge? Or are they basing that off a bridge that maybe underlying is censorship resistant, and they're just putting their kind of like regulatory body in the middle to make sure that everything's kept. So I think, the way that I look at this is kind of like the way that I look at exchanges. Incredibly pragmatic, great way to get, people involved, huge attack surface if they get too big. And we just have to find a balance, right? Because like right now, we're in this spot where, sorry, I'm about to throw down Kia. PayPal buys BitGo, makes some big decisions. Hell, PayPal buys BitGo and makes some technical mistakes. 117,000 BTC is gone. Probably as a Bitcoin user, I might rejoice because if that got burned. But for a DeFi user on the other side, the larger it becomes, the more of a systemic risk you have. So I'm certainly not against regulated custodians because I want the big money to come into the space too. I just want to find that balance where, you know, if it's not Wall Street, but if it's the federal government that's knocking, we can still survive.
So that, I think, you know, we are running out of time, but I think we are getting to another very interesting point, that is this tension between, you know, the fully decentralized, unregulated, like permissionless protocols and or services, and these centralized or partially centralized, and I think Matt is bringing the point of even centralized services can use decentralized protocols to be safer, to provide like better services to people, and what they are providing is a layer of regulation on top of the services, but on the technical layer they are relying on the core protocol. So I think, you know, that's another question altogether. We run out of time. I think, you know, I could go for hours with all of you, because I think all these topics are amazing. I resonate with you, Edan, you know, because that's why we choose to build RSK on Bitcoin. So I can argue with you. I also think we need to be diverse, because I think on the transition in the next decade, it will be this interconnection between the two financial infrastructures that exist today, the legacy one and this new emerging financial infrastructure that, in my opinion, will be the infrastructure of the future, one that will be inclusive by design. But, you know, I want you to share like your final thoughts, 30 seconds each, or, you know, a highlight, something you want to leave for people about DeFi, for Bitcoin, and the future. What's coming next? What are your hopes for the future in this space? So maybe you, Kyra, can start. And
Sure. Yeah, my big thing that I love is optionality, having different options to choose for you and not force anything to anyone. So that's what I'm excited about. Different protocols, different applications on those protocols, different assets, different ways of tokenizing. Let the users have options. Amazing.
Matt?
I guess that DeFi on Bitcoin will be really huge. I'm really worried about regulation. I hope regulators understand that this should be unregulated at the protocol level, and this could be regulated at the customer level. At the protocol level, this should be completely decentralized and transparent.
Excellent. Matt, your final thought?
You're on mute, Matt.
I want to echo Edan's point, which is...
That was a very deep thought.
Well, look, Bitcoiners, maybe consider looking outside of Bitcoin. There's some really interesting tech being built everywhere. You can still use your asset. You can still bring your culture. Ethereans, maybe learn from some Bitcoiners and see if we can actually be censorship resistant as well.
Amazing.
Wise advice.
So I'll totally contradict Matt. Bitcoiners, there's no need to look anywhere else. With Sovryn, we now have permissionless, censorship-resistant DeFi for Bitcoin. So remember, not your keys, not your coins. Keep your keys.
Thank you. Thank you all. It has been an amazing talk. So I hope you on the other side have enjoyed as much as I did. So thank you all for coming and sharing your thoughts. I think it was great. And
thanks. Absolutely amazing. Thank you guys all.